Hey creative, top tier samples are not about polishing for hours on end. They're about the movement that makes a sample feel expressive and alive. In this video, I'll show you the simple approach I developed creating high-end sample libraries for myself and for clients over the past 10 years. Learning this will make it much easier to create samples that feel more personal and true to the emotional world you want to capture. And all you gotta do is take my structured approach and make it your own. The best way I can explain this, surprisingly enough, is through this old 70s organ I've been working on, because this project ended up becoming the perfect example of the way I think about sampling. So here's how that went down. I rescued this organ from being transported to the unused instruments sanctuary. And as you can imagine, being an abandoned instrument, it came free with quite the health hazard, so the first step was avoiding to be patient zero of the zombie apocalypse caused by some dormant 70s supervirus. I also mostly knew what I was getting into in terms of how broken this instrument was, so before I even tested it, I already decided to modify it.
I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care.
Let me tell you.
We don't care.
That meant searching for the original schematics and trying to figure out how the heck this would even be possible in the first place. But with a bit of time and figuring things out with trial and error, I finally was able to test my theories about where to harvest the magical sound-producing electronic particles, and in the end confirmed that this would actually work. Unfortunately, the schematics for this organ didn't come with any voltages, so I'm basically just guessing what the strength of the signal is. But I also have this test rig right here, and it's just a very cheap audio interface. And with this I can estimate how much gain it needs to be in the red zone, and with that I kind of know how hot this signal actually is. So let's give it a test. Even at close to full gain, it doesn't go into the red zone, so it can't be that hot of a signal, which is good. With this test done, we can move on to building the circuit. Of course, I wanted to make this modification as sampleable as possible. That means the integrity of the audio signal is of the utmost importance. In this project, that mainly meant custom shielding of all the modified signal paths, which I luckily had a lot of practice already since the recent Noisebox project. I also did some light visual restoration, because after all that work I couldn't put everything back into a box that still looked like it has been forgotten in storage since the 70s. Finally, I connected everything, closed it up again, and moved the restored instrument to its final spot for testing and recording. And with that, let's also pick up the conversation from the beginning again. You know, when looking at the sample library industry, one thing that really stands out for me is that pretty much everything has been deep sampled already. But that doesn't mean that there isn't room for new perspectives. I think the complete opposite is the case. When pretty much everything has been sampled already, you need to capture something that really screams you and your way of thinking about things. Because people crave this creativity. They want samples that capture more than just sound. So when I start to plan a new sampling project, I try to get as much of me into every aspect of the process as possible. Let's now move to my desk so I can show you my sample creation blueprint that helps me achieve this. Then strap in, because this is going to be a pretty detailed description of my workflow. All right, welcome to the worksheet. What you see here is a visual representation of all the different layers that make up a good sample. Namely, essentials, movement, character, intent, and polish. First, I'm going to explain the layers, and after this quick overview, we're going to fill everything out for this specific project. We're starting with the base layer, which is all about defining essentials. This includes a basic evaluation of the instrument. So this is like a top-down view at what the instrument can and can't do. Then it also includes what notes and note ranges to record. So if you want to go for chromatic sampling or whole tone sampling, or even only recording every third note, which patterns or articulations you want to record. You want to determine dynamics, so if you want to record soft, loud, or multiple dynamics. And you decide on some more basic sound attributes like note length, tempo, and how many round robins you want to record. The next layer is movement. Here's where a lot of the inspirational qualities of a sound come from. Or in other words, imagine playing a chord and it just moves and twists naturally as it builds to a stable sound, and it just immediately evokes a certain musical direction or shapes the stage of the production. So here you want to capture natural shifts in dynamics or how notes evolve and breathe. The third layer is character. Here we focus on what makes the sound feel unique. So that means you want to intentionally bring out quirks or personal textures. In this layer, we define how we're going to capture them. The fourth, and maybe my favorite layer of the sample creation blueprint, is intent. Here we focus on an emotional or musical goal. For example, the main goal of my ePiano VST and the FX Zither VST was to capture a nostalgic, lo-fi, maybe even slightly melancholic feeling, as I thought of how memories are sometimes so untouchably beautiful and how it contrasts with feeling the struggles of the present. The cornier it sounds, the better it is. No joking aside. The more descriptive and clear you are with this and really feel into your emotional goal, the more it will influence key creative decisions in the sampling process. And with that, we finally arrived at the top layer, which is polish. This is like the cherry on top of the production process, and it will contain a lot of technicalities, from denoising and the way the samples are edited to EQ enhancements and so on. In other words, everything that happens after you successfully recorded your samples. The important thing here is refining just enough to highlight the three aforementioned aspects, so movement, character, and intent, without adding unwanted artificial sound qualities. All right, so now that you know what goes into each layer, let's look at this organ together. And let's start with the project name, and we'll call it 70s organ for now. For the top-down view of this instrument, we can note that it consists of three different ways to input note values. 2 keyboards, or manuals for some organ lingo sprinkled in, and 1 octave foot pedals. And it has different options to switch between sounds, so you can decide on what the organ sounds like. So we're going to note 2 keyboards, 1 octave foot pedals, and sound choices. And now the next step is the definition of notes and note ranges. When it comes to notes and note ranges, I'm generally a big fan of chromatic sampling. So that means recording every single note, as this captures the full variety of every instrument. But this decision needs balancing with how big you want your sample library to be in terms of memory usage. A good rule of thumb is, if you're really unsure whether chromatic sampling or whole tone sampling or even recording every third note is the way to go for your project, I'd suggest investing more time into the recording process and rather recording more notes, because leaving samples out that weren't really necessary is easy afterwards, but getting the desired variety when you only recorded, for example, every fourth note is pretty much impossible. For this project, I'm going to go with chromatic sampling. Dynamics are a little bit special for this project because I want to follow a pretty technical approach of staying close to a dBA target at the loudspeaker. Otherwise, this instrument isn't really dynamic, so it doesn't matter how hard you press the keys, but I will implement dynamics in the player software later. This instrument also has swell pedal functionality, and I plan to record this into some patches directly, but it's creaking very badly, and I'm not quite sure if I can fix that. So we're going to go with one dynamic, and a dBA target of 70 to 90 dBA at loudspeaker. Finally, for this layer, I decide on basic sound qualities, which is also pretty straightforward here. I'll be recording 2 variations or round robins with a note length of 10 to 20 seconds, depending on how the notes evolve. Okay, we just talked about evolving notes, and this is already our connection to the next layer, which is movement. This library will be all about evolving sounds, so my focus for the FX chain will be creating as much movement as possible. My central idea for this is to record 2 to 4 FX states for each sample set. So I will come up with a basic, more tame FX chain and record every note. And then I will escalate this FX chain to be more dark, more aggressive, more modified, and I record everything again. This will bring a lot of variety and movement to every patch in the VST. That's it for this layer. Let's move on to the next one, which is sound character. This is closely linked to the basics of your actual recording setup. So where you record, how many and what mics you use, mic placement, stereo, mono configurations, and so on. For this project, I plan to record 3 different perspectives, and I will record at my video background. So the first perspective will be a direct out from the FX chain. The second one will be a mono close of the loudspeaker. And the third one will be a ORTF configuration with a slight distance. Now let's define the intent. As I've mentioned before, this project is all about evolving long notes, so at least for this first sampling session. So I'm imagining slow, kind of woven, organic sounding productions with this. My emotional framing for this project is when you look at nature and you're just so in awe about the intricate details and the serene moments, and it makes you feel so connected to and also responsible for preserving this beautiful planet. And again, here you want to be very descriptive, so I've put it in word for word. Okay, we arrived at the top layer, polish. For this project, I want to keep this library as close as possible to the natural recordings, while at the same time improving sound density and clarity. I'll work the details out separately, because this blueprint shouldn't be a complicated deep dive. So keep natural and improve density and clarity. Cool. Now we have our complete creative roadmap for this project. And with that foundation in place, you can either refine the concept further or start recording right away, depending on the complexity of your project. Let's put everything into 2 sentences. You really want to fill your sample creation process with as much care and nuance as possible, because every decision is a chance to put more of your taste, your story, and your instincts into the final instrument. If you want to take this blueprint and make it your own, you can download it from the BRS Knowledge Bank section on my website. The link is in the description. It's a free Google Sheet you can modify for your own projects and purposes. Until next time.